What's up, guys? This is episode 4 of the Cage Talk podcast. I know we've been gone for a little while, but we're back. So there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world, obviously. But one of the things that's near and dear to us, and it's going to affect us directly, is all the negotiations that have to do with baseball and their return to play. So we just wanted to kind of give you guys an outline, essentially, of the kind of series of events that's played out over the course of the last couple months, and the impact that it's going to have on me and then the rest of us having baseball back. So the first thing I wanted to start off by saying is there's a lot of stuff on social media, Twitter, Instagram, all of it, that there's a lot of people pointing fingers at everybody, right? So you have casual fans pointing fingers at players, you have players pointing fingers at owners. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. Well, we just wanted to kind of give you guys the facts, our take on all that stuff, and then we want to hear what you guys have to give us. So first thing we'll start with is, after everything happened, everybody got sent back, we started negotiating, and I say we, the MLBPA and the MLB started negotiating the terms of the return to play agreement. So the first proposal that the owners gave to the MLBPA and the players was an 82-game schedule, expanded rosters, 14 teams in the postseason, and a 50-50 revenue split. So this is not something that's done in normal years. There's not a 50-50 revenue split. Usually the owners take a bigger share of that revenue.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing too, looking at that, that nobody really realized was with this COVID deal, nobody really understood what the long-term impacts of sports was going to be.
Right.
And so I think when the owners initially gave that proposal to the players, they never dreamt that it was going to be June or July and they wouldn't have anybody in the stands.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's why they went back and kind of tried to reassess and represent something else, because I don't think they were aware or thought that into their first proposal.
Right. And a big portion of the revenue is gate, right? So if people aren't in the seats, the teams aren't making money. So on average, teams were supposed to lose on average $640,000 a game. So I can understand the hesitation of just letting guys run back out there and making their full salary and all this stuff with everything going on, but that's a lot of money. And the 50-50 split was a way for the owners to pass off the loss to the players. And as you would expect, as an employee of a $10.7 billion industry, the players said, we're not going to have that. We don't get a 50-50 split in up years, so we're not going to take the 50-50 split in a down year.
Yeah, and I think when you look at that, it's $52,480,000 just in gate. Now, obviously, they're still making a lot of money with the TV deals and, souvenirs and a lot of this other stuff that still gets their licensing deals, I guess would be the best way to put it, that they're still making. But that represents a pretty large, significant portion of their revenue.
Right. And you're talking about the league as a whole taking a $4 billion hit if none of these games get played, or if none of the people show up to the games. So when you talk about having such a massive industry that's essentially held up by the people, right? It's the people in the stands that are holding all these hundreds of $1 million corporations up. And then the other side of that coin is the people are there to see the players, right? They're there to see the product that's on the field. So the players feeling like that they're getting shorted, they're getting slighted, wasn't exactly going to work. It wasn't going to fly for them.
They obviously weren't impressed with the first offer.
No,
right. But I think the owners didn't take into account the fans not being in the stands. I don't think the players took into account the fans not being in the stands and the overall impact that has on a team.
Right.
You're talking about $52 million over 82 games for one team. And so, you multiply that times 30 teams, the numbers become pretty astronomical.
Right.
And I think that the lack of communication and transparency on both sides of the issue is what really has caused both sides to really hunker down and really draw the lines in the sand, right?
Right.
And I think that's the biggest issue and mistake when you have 40 million Americans that are out of work, and you look at this group of billionaires and millionaires arguing over substantial numbers and amounts of money, but you have folks, at the dinner table that may not be able to afford the light bill or the rent bill. These guys are arguing over millions and millions of dollars.
Right. And there's a point that I want to hit on a little bit later. I want to finish giving the rest of the outline before I reflect on that specific point. But I think for a lot of people, it's hard to imagine being the best in the world at something, right? Like being just so much head and shoulders above everybody else at a specific craft, and you want to be paid for that specific value. But we'll get to that. But the next proposal that after the players were underwhelmed with the revenue split, you would think that the owners would come back with something that'd be a little bit more meat on the bone for the players per se, and it was the exact opposite. So they came back and they proposed a sliding scale, which is it's similar to the way that Americans are taxed. So the more money you make, the more money you pay in taxes. So the higher salaried players are going to take a bigger hit on those salaries. So you're going to have guys that were supposed to make $30 million a year making less than 15, which is less than their half, but even closer to 10. So they were taking almost really close to a quarter on the dollar for what they were supposed to be making for the year, which is understandable in a sense where they weren't playing the full season out. But at the end of the day, nobody wants to do their job for a quarter on the dollar that they're supposed to do.
Yeah, I think when I sat down and I looked at this, not being a baseball player, but just being in the real world of business, right? We've heard numerous companies that have gone out and given or asked their employees to take a reduction in pay. And so when I started thinking about this and whose side I was going to take, or really kind of trying to think through the issue, my initial thought was really, really simple. The offer should have been, hey, we're going to put together a schedule that's maybe half of what we normally play.
Right.
And we're going to give you half of your normal pay minus a 10% haircut.
Right.
Right? A lot of people in different industries, restaurants, hotels, have had to go back to work and have taken 10, 15, 20% reductions in some cases. And so I thought that would have made a little more sense. Hey, we're going to prorate to half the season. And because of the current economy we're in and the hit we're going to take at the gate, we're going to ask that you guys take a 10% haircut and be part of this as well.
Right, and I think that would have been the most civil approach to the negotiating process, and I think that would have been, maybe it wouldn't have been received with open arms by the players, right, but it would have been a better approach than what they did.
Yeah, and I think the explanation would have been better and more feasible, right? More digestible than going back and giving almost an 80% reduction in pay.
Right.
There's certain players I don't agree with some of the takes.
Definitely.
But I can certainly understand not wanting to go out and do the same job, maybe with half of the workload because half of the season is gone, at only 20% of the pay. So I get that. But some of the commentary has just gotten so ridiculous, and the hyperbole and all this other stuff is a little much.
Right.
When you have regular folks that are, in essence, paying these salaries at the end of the day, right? Because we're the ones that go buy the jerseys and go to the games and buy the hot dogs and do all that other stuff. And that was the part that was a little off-putting for me with regards to the player side of it.
Definitely. But also coming from the player side, for the guys that are in arbitration, for the guys that are approaching free agency, them looking at this season and going to play this season, making a quarter on the dollar, if that's what they would have agreed to.
Right.
And then them getting hurt in those years or something happening that impacts the rest of their career because they agreed to a deal that wasn't right. Like that creates a lot of adverse impact down the road that obviously we won't have to see because the deals are changing. But if they would have agreed to that deal, that's something that would have been extremely unfair to the players.
Yeah, no, I can see that too. I mean, the biggest, I think, when you say adverse impact or adverse effect, I think the biggest one's going to be on the side of the fans.
Yeah.
There's been 4 strikes, 2 lockouts, and the fans have always come back. Now, in some of these instances, it's taken quite a bit of time. I remember 1994, I was in high school, I was a senior in high school, and when that strike began, the following year there was a decline in about 20% in attendance.
Right.
So it's a big number. I mean, they're still making huge amounts of money, but it did take a long time for those fans to come back. And I think with all of the labor issues that we've had, it allowed other sports to really take the limelight as well, is the other thing.
Yeah.
That's always concerned me, right?
That's a really good point.
Baseball used to be America's pastime. Well, it isn't anymore.
Right.
And what is this going to impact it moving forward when it's already not the national pastime? I mean, we've become a football country.
Right. But I think that's a really good point because not only has football, basketball has also surpassed us now in popularity. Now we're third, chilling just ahead of soccer, right? And
I don't count soccer as not a sport.
But we're the only country that values basically other sports above soccer. That's why it's the most popular sport in the world. But at the same time, what a time that this would be, or would have been, right, if we would have capitalized a little earlier on bringing baseball back when nobody else was playing.
Right.
Like, you have all the rest of the baseball crackheads who are watching the KBO right now because they're addicted. Just imagine if we could have brought baseball to the forefront, and that's the only thing that people would be watching right now.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that bothers me as a fan, as a diehard fan, is, we put money ahead of safety, right? Like if the players would have said, or the owners would have said, hey, we want to come back, we want to make sure it's in the best interest of our players, that we take into account their health and their safety, while they were doing all this other stuff behind the scenes to try to get it worked out, I think the optics would have been better.
Yeah.
Right? But no, as it always is with baseball, it's the union and the owners, and they're going at it, and it's always about money. And in an economy that we're in with 40 million people out of work right now, the average American is going to be disgusted listening to a fight between billionaires and millionaires.
Right, and that's the part that I wanted to talk about is just like you said, the optics of it all. We have the common man is now pointing the finger at the millionaire player for not playing and not doing their job and putting themselves in danger, when rightfully so they feel like they're doing their regular everyday jobs, putting themselves in danger for the good of everybody, and they feel like these guys are selfish, they're this, they're whatever. But at the end of the day, I always feel like that doesn't follow the responsibility of the players, because if you look at what the players are doing right now, you have big leaguers that are paying salaries of minor leaguers. You have guys that are trying to come together and support, because all these guys were minor leaguers at one point.
Right.
They understand what it is, right? And for us, it's gotten to the point where we make $400 a week. Up to this point, there have been, I think the A's are the only team that have cut their stipends to the minor league guys. There's been a couple of teams that have reduced it by 25%. So instead of $400 a week, they're getting $300 a week. The Jays, for me personally, have extended our stipends through June 31st. So I'm getting paid through June, and then they're going to reevaluate at the end of June, which I know a lot of teams are doing. Some teams have committed to pay them through July. Some teams have committed to pay them through August. It all just depends on the club. But when you look at these billion or hundreds of $1 million corporations cutting their lowest level employees' salaries completely or reducing by 25%, when most of the owners of the teams are worth billions and billions of dollars, it looks extremely selfish. But for the common man, they don't see that part. Right? We see that part because we're players and we understand how it works. But for most people, they don't get to see that the owners of these teams are the ones that get to decide who gets paid and how they get paid. And for us, we just kind of get shafted. And it's just kind of like, which we always get shafted anyway.
Well, and I think the other thing that the owners have done is position themselves now. They wanted to reduce the number of minor league teams.
Right.
And the other thing they've done now is they've really positioned themselves and taken a hard stance where you're going to see the contrition of those 40 teams that they wanted to do away with in minor league baseball in 2021.
Right.
And so, it's, again, you're dealing with billionaire businessmen, millionaire labor lawyers, and all these other things. And I think, just as a common fan, when you look at all this, you say, how can we go through this in the 100+ years of baseball, a total of 6 different times? You would think that over the course of all of these negotiations and all of these collective bargaining agreements, that they would have figured out a way to coexist. Right? You don't have the same issues in basketball, right? We've had, I think it's maybe one work stoppage in football that I can remember. I might be wrong, but I think hockey had one in the 90s. But in baseball, it seems like every 15 or 20 years, you're going through the same thing. And the majority of the issue is with the owners, because the owners are the ones paying these salaries and agreeing to these crazy deals. And then, something like COVID happens where the economy comes to a screeching halt, and they're wanting now to go back and renegotiate. Right. And so,
with a CBA that expires at the end of next year.
Correct. And so I think, the hardlining and the posturing, I just wish it wasn't done in the media and through the media from both sides. Right. I wish it was done behind closed doors and the average fans weren't having to look at this, because it is pretty embarrassing to look at as a fan.
Right. And I struggle to use the word injustice with everything else that's going on in the world right now. Like, there's things that are more important than this, and I'm by no means downplaying everything else that's going on. But I'm actually glad that the owners are using this as an opportunity to kind of further their agenda at a time of crisis, essentially, because it just goes to shine a light on, hey man, these guys are not handling this very well, and this is not something that's new. So I'm almost kind of happy. Like, I say happy, I'm happy at my own expense, right? But at the same time, maybe this will help kind of not get it started, because the conversations of helping us as minor leaguers has already been started, but maybe kind of just throwing some more fuel on that fire to get something going, really going. Because, I mean, this is something that's been in place forever, right? Like,
I do think at the end of the day, people like myself that are true baseball fans, we're going to be pissed off, we're going to be disgusted, but what are we going to do?
You're going to watch as soon as it comes back. Watch,
right? You're going to go to the games when we can go back to the games and it's safe again. You're going to buy the damn jerseys again. And so at the end of the day, the billionaires are going to come out all right. And like you said, it's going to be the guys that are, the minor leaguers that are struggling, the grinders that aren't making a ton of money, that are really going to be left bearing the brunt of all of it.
Right. And it sucks because there's nothing, like, we can't carry that monetary load. Yeah. Like, we don't have anything to carry it with. Like, we don't get paid to begin with. Like, we get paid 5 months out of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the guys that just got released. 300 or 400 guys just got released. There's rumors and talk about another 1,000 or so getting released. And, when you look at that, what are those guys going to do? So they've sat around for 3 or 4 months after taking 3 or 4 months before the year to prepare. And now they just get a phone call and they say, hey, man, you're done. Good luck. Thanks.
And that's the part of this industry that I struggle with, is because at the end of the day, they don't give a fuck about you.
Yeah.
They you serve a purpose. You have a role to fill, and you fill it until they're done with you.
Yeah.
Right. They throw you your couple of bones every month, and then once it's time for you to be gone, it's time to be gone. And that's something that I struggle with as a person, because obviously I understand my worth. They understood my worth. They drafted me. Right. They gave me an opportunity to come and play for them. But it's just the system that makes me feel devalued. And I understand that there's millions of Americans who want to talk about all the stuff that's going on. That's a different episode.
Right.
But I understand that in a different way, and by no means the same way, right? I'm not equating the two. That's not my goal. But I'm just saying, standing up to injustice anywhere is hard. And that's why I applaud everybody that's doing it in the minor leagues right now, everybody that's doing it everywhere across the country right now. Obviously, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. But that's hard. That's really hard. That takes guts.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, man. And I think, what you find is in big business, wherever there's big business, there's always going to be those types of feelings, right? The lower level, the lower rung, the service industry level, whatever the bottom front line facing folks are where these owners are making their money or saving their money in a lot of cases, because those folks don't make a lot of money. And meanwhile, at the very top, they're very, very healthy.
I think you've got a pretty good perspective of that with the job that you do. And
yeah,
you see that.
I see it all the time, and it is big business, and that's unfortunately, I don't see that ever changing. You would hope that it would, and that there's equitable shares for everyone to go around that's making a company or an organization successful.
Right.
But that's pie in the sky, if we're being honest.
But that's the way the world has always been.
Right.
Right. There's always been haves and have-nots, and that's how it's going to continue to be, even coming from this position I'm in. It's just something that as much as it pains me to say, it just is what it is.
Yeah.
I just feel like there's so much that I have no power over to change.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating. But at the same time, with all that frustration going on, there's also rumors of another plan that they're about to getting ready to propose, in which these are still speculation. It's not exact. These are things that I've seen on Twitter from a couple of trusted sources. But the next proposal, this is going to be the third one that they're going to make, talks of a 50-game schedule, 50-ish game schedule, and they're going to give the players their full prorated salaries based on however many games they wind up playing. So I'm not exactly sure of the stipulations of that, the expanded rosters, the playoffs, all that other stuff. But I know that the players are supposed to be getting their prorated salary for however many games they're going to be playing, and that's a really big deal for them. That was what they wanted in the first place. Obviously, they wanted 114 games or 120 games. They wanted a longer season. They're getting a shorter one. But at the end of the day, the money is going to be coming, which I think is promising for us going forward. So we might actually get to see some big league baseball this year.
So if they do the 50-game schedule, they wind up playing about a third of the season, a little bit less than a third of the season.
Right.
So they wind up getting 30% of their money and not having to take any type of haircut, if what we're hearing is correct.
Right.
If the rumors that are floating out there are correct about the next MLB proposal. I'll tell you, thinking about this episode, I tried to really position myself to say, man, I want to pick a side. Whose side am I going to be on? Am I for the owners? Am I for the players? And after really thinking about this now for 2 days, I'm not on either side.
I think that's a fair position to take.
I can see, if I was a player, I can see why, I can see their side, and if I'm an owner, I can see their side. But I really do think both sides should have done a better job of negotiating this quieter. There was a lot longer runway to negotiate it because of everything that got canceled so early on with COVID.
Right.
And it just seems like they waited to the very last minute, so that everything was kind of, DEFCON 6 before they ever sat down at the table to get serious about this. When everybody was sent home in March.
Yep.
We're now in June. And they're just now exchanging proposals. And that's, I guess, to me, with all of the smart people on both sides, that's the asinine part. Right? But as I think about that a little bit, there's also a reason that baseball has the strongest player union. And it's because of this. They're willing to take these chances. They're willing to extend these negotiations to almost a point of no return.
Right.
And that's why there's never been a salary cap in baseball. That's why these salaries are astronomical for the top players when you compare them to other sports, like basketball, which has a hugely long season. They make great money too, but when you compare on average, baseball players are making the most money out of all the major sports in North America.
Right. So, I mean, as the great philosophers have said, more money, more problems, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I can't relate. I should have no problems if that's the actual.
It's just there's so many moving pieces. There's so many variables. It's such a fragile time in America right now. At the end of the day, people just want to see baseball.
Yep.
I know that I've complained about baseball a lot on this show, but at the end of the day, I really do want to go back and play.
Here's what I don't want to see though, and this is the one thing I remember being an 18-year-old kid when they couldn't figure it out. They brought replacement players in, and I don't want to see that ever again because it was terrible.
I don't think anybody wants that.
And to call those guys, and no disrespect to anybody that may have been a replacement player, but as a fan, that is not Major League Baseball to me.
Right.
I want to see the best of the best doing it, or I don't want to see it.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I would love to go and fill it and be a big leaguer for whatever. But at the end of the day,
I wouldn't let you.
that's not the product that you're promised when you buy a ticket to those games. Right. You want to get to see what you paid to see.
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that one. I'm struggling to find the words. I just want something to happen. Right. We've been hanging out in limbo for almost 3 months now. What if March, April? I don't know math. I'm not whatever. But it's been a long time that we've just been sitting here waiting to hear something, and we haven't heard anything. And now that we're kind of getting close to getting the okay or we're shutting it down for the rest of the year, it's exciting. I'm hoping that they can figure something out and get us back on the field. But at the end of the day, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, we're not negotiating anything on the minor league side. Like the MLBPA does that, and whatever they say, we do. So there's nothing we can really do. But hopefully something comes down soon.
I do think it has been pretty cool what some of these minor league clubs have done. I mean, it's not a ton of money, obviously, but the thought that they have continued to pay you guys during your time away from the game, I think is a really, really cool thing, right? They could have just said, hey, you guys aren't playing, you guys go home, you guys figure it out.
Right.
And I do think that 10 years ago, that may not have been the case.
Yeah. Right?
Ever since all of these things have kind of hit the news media and social media makes it where all of these things are in your face immediately. Where in 94, I mean, maybe we can go back and look at this, but I'm pretty sure I'd be willing to bet that they weren't paying minor leaguers during that strike.
Right.
And some of these other years, I'm pretty certain, and maybe we can go back and fact check that and look at it.
We'll verify that.
But I'm almost certain that they weren't paying minor leaguers.
Yeah, and that's a good point. But the other part of that I would remind you is that we don't get paid for the other 7 months of the year.
Well, I understand.
So that's something and obviously maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. We're not playing though, so I understand why we wouldn't be. But at the end of the day, I don't like to use the term or the phrase that I am owed something, right? Because the world doesn't owe you shit. But at the end of the day, this is my job, and I don't get paid for 7 months out of the year. So in the midst of all this stuff that's going on, I feel like that is my right. Even though I might be wrong, even though that might be false, that I feel like that is money that I should be paid.
Yeah, I mean, I would disagree, and this is not normal for us to disagree on topics, but...
That's why we had the show.
But if there's no income coming in,
right?
For the person that owns the organization, which in your case would be the minor league affiliates,
right?
Which, by the way, don't get any money from the MLB,
right?
It's nice that the MLB is stepping in and saying, hey, we're going to continue to pay these guys.
Right.
And so they don't have to do that. I'm not saying it's the right or the wrong thing to do, but when you look at it, hey, you're not generating any revenue right now. You're not worth anything right now. You're sitting here with me.
Definitely.
Right? And so they don't have to pay you. And so I think I'm not saying that they're doing this great thing, but it is a really really nice thing to say, hey, you're part of our organization. It's tough times out there. We're going to take care of you guys.
Right.
And so I think it should be appreciated.
And that statement for me comes out of a place of emotion. Right. That's not logical, which most of the time my line of thinking is along the lines of logic. But that's just something it's a very emotional point for me. It's money. You know what I mean? This is my livelihood. This is what I do. This is my job. So
well, I think one of the things sucks. I think one of the things when we started talking about this episode and kind of spitballing it, one of the things you were upset about were people were getting mad at the millionaire players.
Yeah, definitely.
But they weren't showing that same anger towards the billionaire owners.
Absolutely. And
so talk to us about that a little bit.
And that has nothing to do with pointing the finger at the people who have money, right? Like they have their money, they made their money. I'm sure they did it the right way. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having money, but at some point in time, you have to look at everything that's going on in the world and all of the people who have money who are doing the right things and being the change, essentially. Like they're supporting the people who supported them, right? Because the players at the end of the day hold up these hundreds of $1 million organizations that they have. So
$1 billion organizations now.
$1 billion organizations now. But at the end of the day, for them to just for the minor league guys to cut $100 a week off of their salaries, you have billions. I'm not saying that like I said, I'm not saying you owe us anything, but at the end of the day, these are your people, and it just feels like they don't get paid 7 months out of the year. They're responsible for them now, right? These are your employees, they're your responsibility, and we're gonna try to affect our bottom line. We're gonna save some money by cutting it from you.
Well, but that $100 that they're cutting off that's a nice bottle of wine at dinner for those owners.
Maybe
that's probably all it's covering. Maybe that steak on that plate.
And it's and like I said, it's their money, right? I don't have any say in it. I don't want any say in it. But it just feels wrong to me. There's something morally deep inside of me that feels very a negative tick. I don't even know what. There's just so much stuff there. I don't even know how to describe it to you of why it's so negative in my head of what they're doing. But it's just, you have these guys, man, that you don't know what they're going through. They're relying on $400 a week for this span that they're actually getting paid. They have kids, they have families, they're supporting their people, they're sending money back to their home countries. There's so many good things that money does.
Right.
And you basically taking that away from them just to cover your bottom line, it just feels very selfish.
Yeah. And how much of that bottom line are you actually covering, right? What are you saving?
I'm not an accountant. I don't know. Yeah. I don't really care, to be honest. It's the thought that bothers me. It's the act of extreme selfishness, right? In a time where people need the opposite of that. They need people to help. It just, I don't know. And like I said, I would like to think that if I had billions of dollars, that I would be generous and I would care about people, especially people who are basically supporting my $1 billion industry or my $100 million corporation. I don't know if I would be, obviously, because I don't want to say I would be this $1 billion philanthropist throwing money at all these charities and everything. I don't know if that would be true or not. But at the end of the day, I felt like I would still want to do good things. And at the basis of that would be taking care of the people who've taken care of you.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing has been, you see that in other sports. Like Mark Cuban is paying all of his people.
He was also marching today or yesterday.
Yeah. And so you hear all of these things from these other sports and these other owners saying, hey, man, I'm going to pay my stadium staff. I'm going to pay all of these folks. And you never really hear that. And maybe they are doing it, but you never really hear that on the baseball side.
Right.
And I think that's another one of those optics that always shapes itself to be very, very negative with the owners and the history that they've had with all of these labor issues that have gone on, right? So, kudos to guys like Mark Cuban and some of these other owners that have gone above and beyond. But I'd love to hear more of that coming from the MLB ownership.
Right. And I'm really glad you said that about Mark Cuban paying his stadium staff.
Yep.
These are the people who work at the stadium,
yep.
right? And the MLB owners are refusing to pay their minor league guys who are going to eventually play on their major league fields. There's just a huge disconnect between, I don't know if it's between baseball and the other sports, I don't know if it's between those owners and those owners, but there's just a huge disconnect that needs to be bridged, and I don't know how, right? I'm just a 22-year-old, I know nothing minor league baseball player, but at the end of the day, there's something that needs to change there. There's something that needs to be brought to the attention the right way, instead of just having the common fan point the finger at the guy that's on the field as to, hey, you should just play because you have plenty of money anyway. Those guys have billions of dollars that are sitting in the boxes watching these games play.
I think one of the things that we talked about too that you make mention of is, the billionaires are kind of shying away from taking on some of that salary.
Right.
But then you have big time baseball players that are saying, you know what, I'm going to step up and I'm going to help the minor league guys.
Right. How about some empathy out of those guys, right?
Yeah.
Those guys were minor leaguers. They've walked in our shoes. They've struggled like we struggled. And just to see them turn around and essentially assume the role that those guys are supposed to do. They're taking over responsibility for something that they shouldn't be taking over, right? Because now that they're doing this, they've made it a thing. It's now okay. Now the owners have an even more of a right to say, okay, they got it covered. Right. I don't need to do anything. Which sucks like that. Take accountability for what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. So a guy like David Price.
David Price, you've got Doolittle from the Nationals. There's been a bunch of guys that are now, and they're obviously the bigger name guys have more money to do this. But I know there's a bunch of guys that are starting to pool their money and trying to get their guys that are in my shoes. And granted, my shoes are fine. Like I'm fine where I'm at. I'm not struggling. But there's guys in my league that have kids. They have families. They're supporting their family somewhere else.
Right.
And now they don't have the money that they rely on for a living. Because like I said, they're chasing their dream. They're trying to be big leaguers just like the rest of us. They only get paid 5 months out of the year. It's not a whole lot while they're getting paid. Like they're still relying on their bonuses. If the bonuses are still there, right? Not all of us sign for thousands and millions of dollars. So it's just there's so much stuff, man, that I just wish people would do the right thing. Right. And it would be a lot easier for us right now, especially for the owners, to just do the right thing. Like I don't want the players to make any more money than they should. I want them to get what they deserve, right? That's always what I feel like people should get, is what they deserve. So at the end of the day, if we can sit down and find a way to make that happen, let's just play baseball.
So what are your thoughts on like a guy like David Price, right? What is he? He's not played a game for the Dodgers. I think that's where he's at now, right? And he's stepping up to the plate and saying, "Hey, I'm going to help take care of these minor leaguers."
I think that's what everybody should want to do. I think that's the kind of guy that people in the minor leagues, guys that are going to eventually be minor leaguers and big leaguers, like those are examples that are set and that they remember, right? You remember when the coronavirus hit in 2020, who was there for the players when they needed it? Because I'm not saying all the owners are bad, because some of the owners are doing great stuff for the players, but it's going to be the players that you remember helping out the other players, the little guys, the big guys helping the little guys, right? And that's always a story that people love in the media.
So is that the part that bothers you about the players being painted in a negative light when you have players like David Price that are going above and beyond to support?
Absolutely. You're vilifying the wrong villains. You're vilifying the wrong people. It's not the players that deserve to bear the brunt of all of your anger and frustration when all they're trying to do is get what they're owed and play the game. Like, all of these guys want to play. Maybe not all of them, right? You have some of them that feel like I do sometimes, but at the end of the day, they're baseball players. That's what they know. That's what they do. All they want to do is just get paid for what they deserve.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, as I started thinking about this more, obviously I'm a Cubs fan, right? That's my team. And I think about, the Cubs and Wrigley and Wrigleyville specifically, the area around Wrigley, where the Cubs have gone out and bought almost all of the rooftops. They've bought almost all of the bars and all of the restaurants on Clark, on Addison, all of the areas surrounding the ballpark. And now that coronavirus has hit and everything has come to a screeching halt, they're losing money not only on their baseball stuff, they're losing money on all the bars and all the rooftops and everything else they own. And so, part of my displeasure with the owners, and I know I'm playing both sides, but I take my team, the Cubs, as a perfect example, is now you're trying to recuperate some of your money for some of the other business investments that you've made where you're losing money.
Right, you're bringing in other variables that aren't related directly to who's going to end up paying for it.
Exactly right. And so, again, when I think both sides have a lot of blame to share.
Definitely,
quite frankly. But I do think about when I look at my specific team and I look at all of those business ventures that the Cubs have made. On top of that, they're trying to launch, their own TV deal now.
Like the Yankees have the Yes Network.
Yep. They're trying to launch their own network in the middle of all this. So I'm sure they're losing a ton of money because this was supposed to be, I think, the first year or the year leading into that deal.
Right.
And so it only helps me to think, hey man, they're trying to recuperate some of the losses on the backs of the players' salaries.
Right, and that's the issue with trying to monopolize that area. Right. You're trying to make sure that you're responsible for all this stuff, and then you have something like this happen. And obviously Wrigleyville is something else when the Cubs are, well, first of all, when the Cubs are playing and when the Cubs are good, right? That's an area that booms. But now in a time like this, like I didn't even think about that. I didn't even know that. And that's what I said earlier. There's so many variables, so many things going on that we don't even know.
Right.
But I didn't even think about that. That's something that is interesting because now you're going to have players paying the price for stuff that's not even directly related to them.
Yeah.
And that's disappointing.
So on one of your show notes on 4B, I thought it was kind of an interesting note that you put there, going back to, if you're financially stable and you're able to weather the Corona storm. Talk to us a little bit about that insight.
Yeah, so like a lot of the time that we do these shows, we try to find a way to relate it to you guys, right? We try to find a way to kind of bridge the gap between my experience and his experience and your experience as a listener. So one of the things that I thought about, and it took some time, and it still might not make complete sense. In my head, it makes sense, but I'll just read it through for you guys. For you guys at home that are upset with the players for trying to get more money, you feel like they already have enough money, you feel like they're being selfish. Just imagine you're completely financially stable, right? Money is not an issue. You have enough money in the bank to cover all of your bills, all of your expenses for a couple of years. So we'll just use that as the example. And you want to return to your job. You love your job. It's something you're passionate about, something you're good at, something you want to do. But in a time of extreme circumstance like we're dealing with now, your employer says, you can have your job back, you can continue to do what you're supposed to do, but we're only going to give you a quarter on the dollar. We're only going to give you 25% of your normal salary to come back and work, even if it's half the amount of hours we'll use for the example. Just imagine that, 25% of the money for half the work. Would you do that? Do you love your job enough to go and accept that deal? Right? And I have a couple of options. If your answer is yes to that question, I would accept 25% of my pay for 50% of the work. You probably really love your job. You're probably super passionate about it. It's probably something that you wake up every day invigorated, excited to do.
Or you might be a business owner and not have a choice.
Or you might be a business owner and not have a choice.
So you have to get up and go do that.
Exactly. And then for the other people who might not love their job, who might not love their boss, which I feel like is a lot of people. I feel like a lot of people feel like that about their job. I might be wrong, but that's my opinion. If you say that you would go back and do your job for 25% of the pay for 50% of the work, I think you're a liar. I think you're a liar.
So you'd be doing half of the work, but only a quarter of the money.
For a quarter of the money.
Yeah, I don't think that...
Would you do that?
I hope nobody's listening. No, I would not. I hope nobody from my job is listening. No, I don't think anybody would. And I think
it's not feasible.
It's not, because the stress is going to remain the same, right?
Exactly.
The expectation is going to remain the same, but your lifestyle, what you're able to provide for your family, all of those things then change or have to be reset, readjusted. Mm-hmm. Not that you couldn't survive, because everybody can readjust and downsize a house and drive a better.
But in our example, you have enough money to cover all that.
That's right. But in your example, it would have to be, like you said, something that you're 100% passionate about and invested in, and typically that's going to be somebody that's doing or has their own business. Right. And that's where that's going to fall. So I agree. I think I wouldn't tell people they're lying, but I would probably question the authenticity of the answer.
Right. And obviously that's I want to say it's an extreme example, but I'm sure for some of these guys who are making these negotiations, have these things, that's not extreme. That's what their reality is, right? Yeah. They've got generational wealth. They have money on money on money. They're not worried about money. Like, that's not an issue for them. And I think for the common man, I understand why they would be upset listening to them talk about this and not being able to understand why they wouldn't just take the money and go back. But at the end of the day, these guys, like I said earlier, they are the best in the world at what they do. And I think that for a lot of people, understanding what that means is a concept that maybe they'll never understand. Like, you just can't comprehend being head and shoulders above the rest of the world at something.
And the revenue generators is the other thing.
And wanting to be paid according to that.
So people are going to come out and see, they're going to want to see Mike Trout. They're going to want to see Chris Bryant. They're going to want to see Javi Baez. They're going to want to see, insert star here, Yadier Molina and some of these guys. And so I agree. I mean, and understanding that what they do, not everybody can do, and the generating of interest and money and TV deals and sponsorships and licensing deals, and all of that other money that comes with it isn't possible without those guys.
Exactly, and
So,
I think that's something that it's common sense but overlooked. If that resonates with anybody.
yeah, I think back to 94, 95 when I was an 18 and 19-year-old kid, and the things that stand out to me were the replacement players, right? Tony Gwynn was hitting 394 when the season got canceled.
That's stupid.
Right? Matt Williams, I don't know if you know who that is.
I don't know who that is.
Matt Williams was actually on pace to tie Roger Maris's home run record when the season got canceled. He was at 43 homers in the National League. I mean, crazy stuff. Ken Griffey was at 40, by the way.
Right.
And those are the things that I remember as not being able as a baseball junkie to watch and have some sort of closure to those seasons. Frank Thomas won his second MVP that year. There was a bunch of guys hitting over 320. I mean, it was just an unbelievable year for baseball. Obviously, steroids and that kind of stuff was playing a big part behind the scenes.
Right.
Probably, allegedly. Don't nobody sue me.
Innocent until proven guilty.
That's right. But there was all of those things. The Montreal Expos had, I think, the best record in baseball. They were like 74-40. And so
is that the Vladdy Senior times? Was he still there?
I think so.
I don't know.
94. I think he was. But if you think about that now, there's no Montreal Expos anymore.
Right.
They took years to come back from that strike and that lockout.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now, if this continues, I think to myself, what's the next repercussion of all of these things that are going on now?
Yeah.
What else is going to happen?
I mean, I don't think that's something we can answer now. I think that I don't know if anybody really has the answer to that. I think it's something that we're just going to have to find out at the end of all this, because we talked about this the other day in the midst of all this Corona stuff. Like, not to be dramatic, but it kind of changes the way that maybe the rest of my life, the rest of your life gets lived out. You know what I mean? Like, it changes a lot of different things in the market, in the job market for me. Like, I'm 22. Like, I don't know how long I'm going to play baseball. I'm going to have to get a job eventually. Like, that's going to be different when it's my time to go and get it.
There's no doubt about there's going to be a new normal.
Right.
And it's going to be, I think, years before we know the full extent of it and before we become completely used to whatever that new normal means.
Right.
There's 40, I think I read that on the 28th of March, or May rather, there was 40 million people filing for unemployment. I mean, that's over 10% of your country.
Yeah.
And in the working age, it's even higher, obviously. And so when you look at 2020, it's been one hell of a crazy year, right? And I've only been around 43 years, but I don't remember anything remotely close to all of this that's going on.
Yeah, and that's actually, I'm really glad you just brought that up, because if they were to stop paying us, or for like the A's guys who just got stopped, all their stuff stops, they can't file for unemployment,
right?
Because they're still under contract, right? And that's just like, it's just so unbelievable to think about that.
Well,
like,
maybe they can.
I don't think they can. I think that I read that, I can't remember where I read it, but you just can't.
Yeah.
Like, you're under contract.
And trying to go out and find a job, pretty tough.
Especially when you say, hey man, I'm going to get a job. Like, for me, like we talked about it. My brother works at Walmart, just kind of like as a joke, but not really as a joke. What if I went and got a job at Walmart?
Right.
And then they call me in August. Like, who are you applying to other than jobs like that who need mass amounts of workers?
Right.
Or you just apply and say, hey, I need this job for a month and a half, and then I'm going to be gone. Like, nobody's going to hire you.
Right.
You know what I mean? Except for at the places that need, like Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot, retail stores, grocery stores.
Those three in particular are doing really, really well.
Right.
But the rest of that sector isn't doing all that great.
Right.
Right. And so everybody is going to them, and they're going to have the ability to pick the cream of the crop for them.
Definitely. And then you have companies like Amazon, who they're vilified a lot for the tax stuff and all this other stuff, the working conditions, but they hired 125,000 workers, and they're keeping them on.
Yeah.
During all this stuff. Like, that's the kind of stuff that's good. It's positive that I'd like to see more of. But I just to the point, back to the original point of 40 million plus Americans filing for unemployment. Those guys that work for the A's, if they stop paying me at the end of June, I can't. That's not going to be me. I can't. I'm legally not allowed to go and apply.
Yeah.
So that's just just crazy to think about.
You're gonna have to go sell hot dogs or something to somebody, because you ain't living here for free.
I'm gonna have to go do something. But you have anything else? Anything else that you want to talk about? Anything
No,
else you want to touch on?
I think the big. I know you're on the player side. Obviously, I'm not going to say you're biased. You're biased.
I'll accept the bias.
But I think there's, like I said, man, and I don't mean to belabor a point or repeat it, but I do think there's blame on both sides. I wish that after, 4 strikes and 2 lockouts, that there would be a way for them to start to approach these conversations maybe a year before, their CBA is up.
Right.
And do so in privately where they're able to hammer out, the foundation of an agreement, or at least the framework of an agreement, and not do it in the media.
Yeah.
Because, especially in today's time, like I said, when you have 40 million people out of work and you have people that are struggling to pay and decide whether they're paying their rent or going grocery shopping, and you have these guys arguing over billions and millions of dollars, the optics is just not good.
Right.
It's supposed to be entertainment. It's supposed to be where we go to decompress and take our minds off of things. And it's just added one other piece to this crazy 2020, where it's one other thing that you just look at and you go, I'm just disgusted by it.
Yeah. And the other point, and I don't mean to drag this out or keep just adding fuel to the fire and keep talking, but the part that I forgot to add at the beginning of this was when they sat down to do the negotiations, the owners would not open up their books. The
Right.
players were not allowed to see what was actually coming in and out. So the whole basis of a good faith negotiation was never existent.
Well, and I think that's the other thing that I think you will see change in this new collective bargaining agreement. And the reason they don't have to open their books is because it's a closed book CBA.
Right.
And so what I do think you'll see is the players are going to ask for more transparency moving forward, and they will actually be able to see what the real revenue is. The other thing that baseball owners do that I just found out about that I think is interesting is there's certain revenue that comes in that, even though it's generated maybe on an ancillary side by baseball, is not attributed to baseball, so that it doesn't go into those.
So that $10.7 billion number might
There's
be higher.
It is higher. There's other things that they do not put directly into that revenue stream because it's an ancillary add-on, right? And so there are other things that are going on in addition to that 10.7 billion, that even when they do open up their books, if they keep it kind of structured that way, it still would look like that 10.7, or maybe it's really 15 billion.
Yeah, and whether it's fair or unfair that they keep it closed, I don't know. But at the end of the day, all the player contracts are public. Like, everybody knows what those are. They know the terms of them. It's set. And then when you're trying to negotiate with people who have everything they have on the table versus people who are hiding what's really on the table, it's why you've seen the delay in trying to get this done.
Yeah.
So I think that's all we have for you guys on this topic. We had a lot to say. I mean, at the end of the day, I hope something gets done. I hope we get going and get moving on this. But the next episode we have is going to be, I think we're going to do it on everything that's going on in the United States with all the riots and the protests and all that stuff, and our take. I know he's not super enthused about it. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's my right to use my voice and my platform to continue to kind of spread our message of love. And obviously, like, we don't agree with everything that's going on, but there's a right way and a wrong way. And I think that as long as we continue to do things the right way, that we'll continue to progress and move on. But that's it. That's all we have for you guys. Thank you guys for joining us. Until next time.